Thanks very much. I'm going to be talking today about wildlife forensics and the shark fin trade. So, a lot of the reason we are here today and talking about sharks is these things. This is the X-ray of the first dorsal fin of a dusky shark. If you've never seen the inside of a fin, there's not much to it. These sort of dark pieces are cartilage. That's the base of the fin. And I'm not sure if you can see it. I can certainly see it from here, but there's very fine material coming up out of the base of the fin. And those are called serrata trichia. They're not actually cartilage. They're what we call fin needles. These fin needles are the basis of shark fin soup. That is what makes up the noodles in the soup, as it were. These serrata trichia do not have a taste, but they provide a texture to the soup. And this soup retails for about $100 a bowl. So you can imagine at that sort of prices, these shark fins can fetch anywhere up to about $200 a kilo, which makes them one of the most expensive seafood products in the world by weight. So in global shark fisheries, the chain of custody for a shark fin is typically the shark fin will be removed from the carcass of the animal somewhere in the world where it's caught. There's more than 150 countries participate in the shark fishing and shark fin industry. The shark fin is actually doesn't require much processing for the fishermen. All they have to do is actually put it out in the sun, and depending on the size, it'll dry very quickly. And that product right there, that's the product that then gets exported to the major markets. And the major markets for shark fin soup are in Asia. The biggest importers of shark fin are Hong Kong and China and mainland China, with most of the consumption taking place in there. So once these dried fins get to Hong Kong or China or someplace else, the skin is actually then removed. They treat the fin with chemicals to bleach it out. The buyers like this very white color on the fin. And then it's the fins are basically sold at retail establishments, and finally they get to the consumer as soup. So it's a chain of custody that can span the entire globe, essentially. And it's a very big trade. This is a drying facility where shark fins that have been brought in are being dried. And globally, we have very poor information on the size of this fin trade. And in fact, there's only one estimate for how big it is for 1 year. And that year, in the year 2000, Shelley Clark estimated that the median estimate was about 36 million sharks that year were killed for the fin trade. That's not including sharks that weren't killed for the fin trade. And her confidence intervals ranged all the way up to 73 million individuals. So at the upper limit, it might even be much higher than that. So it's a very, very big trade, and it's a very lucrative trade. So it's also a trade that's very, very poorly regulated. And we don't have really any sort of the basic elements of regulation that you would need for keeping sharks shark fishing at sustainable levels. So some of the basic things we would like to see for the shark fin trade is we would like to monitor the overall species composition, so what species are being taken. We would like to have the ability to say you need to leave these species out of the fin trade because they are declining or they're really vulnerable. Also, we would like to know, with all these countries participating, what regions are contributing most to the fin trade and what regions are contributing most to particular species, so that we can target those reasons for conservation. So all of those things you would think would be very basic, and we have none of that at all for sharks right now, for the shark fin trade. And one of the major difficulties and one of the major limitations for why we don't have this information is this myth that shark fins are impossible to identify, that all shark fins look alike. There's millions and millions of fins, and there's no way for anybody to figure out what species it is, let alone where it comes from. And really that's where some research that's been going on in my lab and stuff I've done as a graduate student is really coming in, because I'm going to hopefully convince you by the end of this that that's absolutely not true. So one way to identify a shark fin is using DNA. And there's two basic methodologies for using DNA. One is you use what's called a DNA barcode, which is a certain region of the mitochondrial DNA known as the cytochrome oxidase 1 gene. And that gene has been sequenced for many, many species all over the world, not just sharks. But you can actually get the sequence from a fin, and you can put it into an online database, and it'll actually tell you what species it is. And we actually have a lot of DNA barcodes for sharks, so we're in really good shape to use the DNA barcodes to identify them. And then we also have what's called species-specific polymerase chain reaction, which is actual DNA tests that are quicker and less expensive than DNA barcoding, that you can actually do a test to see if a fin comes from a particular species. You may ask, is there enough DNA in fins to actually do this sort of analysis? I can go even one better. This last summer, we actually had shark attack survivors go to restaurants all over the United States, and they got samples of shark fin soup, so the actual soup itself. And in my lab, we were able to pull out the individual fin needles from this soup. When you consider what's happened, that fin has gone somewhere in the world where it was caught, to being dried in the sun, to being bleached out and treated in Asia. Then it's maybe come back to the United States in that form. Then it's been cooked. There is still DNA in there enough for us to identify the species using some techniques we developed in the lab. And we actually were able to, for most of the fin soup samples, tell exactly what species it came from. So this stuff definitely works. So a fin is very easy for me. The fin soup's a little more challenging. The fin is very easy. So in terms of how you use a DNA test for a forensics application, I'll tell you a little story that comes from this general region. Barbara had pictures of great white sharks. These are not pretty pictures. These are all dead white sharks. These are all from this region, the western North Atlantic. And a little bit before and certainly after Jaws, there was a big fishery for white sharks here. It was a recreational fishery, and it was trophy hunting, really. And as a result, white sharks were thought to have really declined in the western North Atlantic as a result of this trophy fishery. And in the 90s, white sharks became prohibited. So you're not allowed to kill, and to this day, you're not allowed to kill white sharks either recreationally, or commercial fishermen are not allowed to kill white sharks. The picture that I find really interesting, this is how abundant they used to be. This is the catch of one longline in the Jersey Shore in the late 60s. And there's about 8 white sharks right there. Of course, I think there's a lot scarier things on the Jersey Shore nowadays. But certainly there was a lot more of them back then. Now, in 2002, I developed a DNA test with my wife so that people could actually take a fin or a piece of meat, and they could do this test really quick, and they could see if it was a white shark. And we actually published the paper, and one of our reviewers actually said, this is a great test, we published the paper, but nobody kills white sharks for their fins or anything like that. That just will never happen. This test will never be used. 1 week after we published our DNA test, we actually had a call from the National Marine Fisheries Office of Law Enforcement on the south shore of Long Island. And they had actually been in the process of busting a seafood dealer for something. It was a Chilean sea bass violation, and they found a warehouse that had 4,000 pounds of shark fins on his property. And he was actually boasting that he was one of the largest shark fin exporters in the United States, and then he wasn't too smart because his permit wasn't current. They decided to look into his fins a little bit, and they found a sack that had the word porbeagle written on it, and porbeagles are legal species of shark to have, but buried within the bag was another bag, and that was labeled blanco, which is the Spanish word for white. So the agents became very suspicious that these might be white sharks. So this was actually my first trip to New York. We came in and I actually looked at these fins. So that's all of them there. Turns out there were actually 21 sets of fins, so 21 individuals. I took them back to the lab, did DNA test, and all of them proved to be white sharks, in fact. So I thought that, one trader to have 21 white sharks, I mean, could you imagine that in California, one trader having that many? It was pretty shocking. We measured all these fins and we were able to regress the body size of the animal, and most of them were about 2.5 meters long, which would have been a very young white shark. And so most likely these were killed in South Shore of Long Island, and I've heard rumors that they still get killed by fishermen. The good thing about this was we were able to contribute to this guy getting the largest fine in U.S. history for a wildlife crime. It was over, I think it was pretty close to $1 million he got fined for 21 white sharks. So it's something that can be, DNA can definitely be very useful in that regard. That is a good example of how DNA is best used. So because of this one word on the bag, Blanco, there was a suspicion or probable cause that it's a white shark, and that made it make sense for us to come in and do a DNA test. So the trouble with doing DNA tests is they do take time and they do cost money, and the trade is so large that no country in the world is really just going out and randomly screening fins to see what species are there. And that it's just that is the really major obstacle to using DNA all the time. And really, I think the solution to that issue is this: if you have lots and lots of fins, if you're a custom agent, if you can just look at these fins very quickly and you can zero in on protected species and then seize them and then go ahead and do a DNA test, I think that's really the way forward, because customs agents really don't do DNA tests in the field. They really rely on their eyes. And that has been a real limitation for the shark fin trade, again, because there's this perception that these fins all look alike and they can't be identified to species. So funded by the Pew Environment Group, we've been actually developing tools for customs agents to be able to visually identify shark fins. So in the last 2 years, my wife and I have been going to different countries. We've been working with, although the shark fin traders often don't know it, we're working with them to look at their fins. We've looked at well over 1,000 fins from 41 different shark species. And our goal has just been to look at these fins, take pictures, and get a sense of what the differences between the different species are, and then see if we can actually then go in and identify them ourselves visually. And really, we wanted to develop tools for the species of sharks that are going up for CITES in a few weeks. So that's the hammerheads, 3 species of large hammerhead, the oceanic whitetip, and the porbeagle. We wanted to see if their fins were particularly distinctive. Now, at the CITES meeting, no doubt, the last CITES meeting, China and Japan said it's not possible to identify shark fins. No doubt that will be said again at this meeting. Now, the only thing about China saying that there's no way to identify shark fins is that the Chinese importers of fins actually have trade names for different fins that correspond to species. Not only that, if you look at these trade names, for example, this one here, this trade name, this is the oceanic whitetip right here, and this is the actual concordance between that category and the actual biological species, oceanic whitetip. So 100% concordant, this particular trade name. So it's pretty funny when you hear these delegates saying this can't be identified, and you can actually show that, yes, it absolutely can, using these particular trade names. The argument that they then come up with is, well, these are traders. They import these fins, they see lots of these fins, they're experts. So customs agents won't be able to do this because they don't have that expertise. Fair enough comment, maybe. So this is a whole bunch of different shark fins. These are the first dorsal fins of 7 different species. And I would ask you the question, do they all look the same? There's differences, right? You see there's differences in the markings, there's differences in the overall color, there's differences in the shape. And really, that's what we think these traders are looking at. And each of these species, the fins actually have a different value because they have a different ratio of cartilage to those serratitricia, those fin needles. So some of these tall fins, for example, go for very high prices because they have very little cartilage and they have very long, fine serratitricia, which makes for a very good texture for the soup. So the traders have learned how to identify these fins into these trade categories for that reason, because they get a different price for different fins. So the question for us is, can anybody do this, or is this something that you need to be a shark fin trader for? So, spoiler alert, we can do it, and I'm going to teach you guys how to do it. So we've developed a guide with Pew. There's a paper guide. We also have an app that you can follow. Normally I would bust out a whole bunch of disgusting shark fins, but we're going to identify that particular shark fin right there using the guide. So the first question, is the fin generally uniform in color, or does it have a distinct white or black marking? Would you say it has a distinct white marking? So we would move forward. We say, is the apex white? Yes. All right. Is the apex pointed with a white marking on the tip, or is it rounded and has a large mottled white patch? Last one, it's rounded, it's not pointed. So that's an oceanic white tip. That's as easy as it. That's why the Chinese traders are able to do it with such certainty, because that's a very, very distinctive fin. No other shark has a fin like the oceanic white tip. Porbeagle, all right? Again, question, is it uniform, or does it have a white marking someplace? Does everyone see the white marking on the what we call the free rear tip there? All right? So markings are white, free rear tip is white, it's a porbeagle. No other shark has that marking on its first dorsal fin. So you can go through, that's how easy it is to do a porbeagle. You can even see it on this live animal, they have this big white patch. Hammerheads do not have white patches, but what they have is a very tall fin. They have extremely valuable fins because they have this high aspect ratio. So this is just showing tall fins all the way to sort of really broad fins. So we simply tell a couple of the user to do a couple of measurements, divide one by another to get an aspect ratio. And if it has if this ratio is a certain thing, you know it's a very tall fin. I won't go into that into detail because I only have less than 5 minutes now. But basically, hammerheads have this tall fin. You can see that. So if I hold up these 7 fins again, can you guys spot one that is broadly rounded with a white apex? This number 2. That's an oceanic white tip. You are now an expert Chinese trader. Can you see the porbeagle with the white free rear tip? Number 1. Does anyone see a fin or any fins that are very much taller than they are broad? Number 7 and number 4. Those are hammerheads. So that's literally as hard as it is. That's why these Chinese trade names are so good. So the answer, can we identify these by group? For the CITES proposed species, yes, we absolutely can. I sound like Barack Obama. Yes, we can. So really what I'm proposing is that we give these customs guys this guide. They can have it on their phones, and all they need to do is recognize white patches and tall fins, and then they have probable cause to hold it, thinking it's one of these species, and then that's when they call me and I do a DNA test to confirm it. Probably not me, probably somebody in their own country. Just very quickly, I know I don't have much time, but in terms of can we trace where the fin comes from? Yes, we can again, because if we go back to DNA, some research we've done in my research group, we've found that female sharks actually home back to the place they were born to give birth. And as a result, if you look at the mitochondrial, mitochondrial DNA of individual sharks, you see that it's geographically segregated. Certain parts of the mitochondrial DNA are geographically segregated. So these are actually the frequencies of different DNA sequences of scalped hammerheads in different regions in the Western Atlantic. And what you can see is that, the black sequence is much more common in the Atlantic and Gulf. This white sequence is much more common in Brazil. And actually all of these sequences are unique to the Western Atlantic, so that you don't find them in the Eastern Atlantic, you don't find them in the Indian or the Pacific. So all we have to do is sequence that region of the mitochondrial DNA in a fin, and then we have this database available. We can actually trace the fin back to where it came from because of this homing ability of females. We actually did this with about 60 scalped hammerhead fins from Hong Kong, and we were able to trace 25% of them back to the Western Atlantic, which is actually the place where hammerheads are arguably in the most trouble. So just to wrap up very quickly, I just wanted to stress that regulation of the fin trade using CITES and other methods is absolutely feasible. The identification of these fins can be done in the field by customs agents, and when we add DNA, we can absolutely prove the species identity, and for many species, we can also tell where in the world it came from. Thanks very much.